Hello, everybody, on the first English episode of our podcast, Business and Cybersecurity of Diamatics. I'm very pleased that I have one special guest from Romania. His name is Andrei, and he will just shortly introduce himself. Just to give you a brief introduction, our episodes are done in Bulgaria, but we are also looking to expand to our audience, which might not speak Bulgarian, and they want to hear some interesting perspective on cybersecurity, on the interactions between cybersecurity and business, and on different trends and tendencies. This episode will do a special edition, even though it's our first episode in English. This week we have a special conference focused on industrial cybersecurity. And I think, at least in our estimates and what we see, it could be really the first conference on OT security, on industrial cybersecurity, and we wanted to do something special. So that's why I have invited Andrei, who is a security engineer, an OT specialist, and one of the people who in this region, at least in Eastern Europe, has a very deep understanding of how to secure control systems, industrial systems, critical infrastructure. And with that, I would like to welcome him. Hello, Andrei, and welcome to our podcast. Could you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about you. How did you come to security engineering? What was your path to cybersecurity?
Hello, Evgeny, and thank you for having me. Quite a pleasure to discuss these things. It's always a pleasure to talk about things that I find quite fascinating and I'm fairly passionate about. To answer your question directly, honestly, how I got to cybersecurity, that's an interesting story, because I wanted to be an architect, and then I kept studying for the architecture exam, and I was like, this is so boring, drawing the same thing over and over again. I was like, what else could I do? So I got to technical faculty, and after that, I want to do something interesting, and I got into some networking courses, and then just follow the wind. Wherever something might pop up, I would go there, and that's something that popped up is cybersecurity. Now, currently, I do work at Fortinet. I'm the sometimes channel systems engineer, sometimes a systems engineer at Fortinet, or how we might like to call ourselves sometimes sales engineers. And I do actually also think that your event this week might be the first really real OT event, in-person event in Bulgaria, which is really exciting, as this is a very interesting topic. Some places have talked about OT for quite some time, some places have not. It's all about awareness at the end of the day. But it is something that I find very, very fascinating, because I did engage in this part of IT, this industrial network, even before cybersecurity. This has been an interesting topic for me. So the fact that I found a niche where I could find both sides of the coin, both the security and in the actual technical stuff interesting, is pretty cool.
Thank you for your introduction. It's really interesting how people find their calling early in their life, or just through some random stuff which happen and they ignite their hearts and what they actually want to do in life. Okay, so let's go into the topic. The world of automation, the world of manufacturing, production, energy, oil has evolved really in the last 20-25 years with the expansion and development of technology, especially information technology, which has been sort of the leading vertical, which has helped many businesses jump from just industry 3.0 to industry 4.0, and maybe we're talking now about 5.0. But anyway, this evolving world of automation, of robotics, of industry has brought many new opportunities for the businesses, given them increased capabilities, efficiency, and the ability to run their business literally through their phone. However, this has caused some other developments, which has opened the threat landscape, which is something which we hear not every day, but it is something which pop up really during last year's invasion in Ukraine, when the energy sector has been hit of Ukraine, of course, has been hit by not only by the physical military equipment, but also the cyber equipment, and has caused significant shutdowns in different areas. How do you assess this? How do you see this development? What are the dangers which lie ahead of this path to digitalization and robotics?
Well, that's quite a subject to broach, but I really do want to say one thing first. You mentioned how the advancements in technologies bring opportunities to all these producers, to anyone who operates in the industrial sector, be it automation, manufacturing, energy production, anything really. The problem is that, well, the simple situation is that everyone has to be competitive in the market. If you are not competitive, then the risk you are that you will die, because other companies, other producers will come with better products, cheaper products, more energy, whatever the industry might entail. And the only way to stay ahead, the only way to be competitive, is to use these digitalization to increase your production or to efficientize your production. And at the end of the day, it's not really that much of an opportunity as a necessity. And that is why I think there is this big explosion of, let's say, marketing articles about Industry 4.0, Industry, well, maybe 5.0. The fact is, usually the evolution of technology presents incremental changes, small leaps in technology that are not effectively immediately used. Maybe use this, maybe you improve that, maybe you improve that. And this usually means a slow and steady growth. But because this digitalization presented such a strong increase in production, a strong decrease in necessary manpower for all these industries, a lot of them have started doing this overnight, because if they did not, then they might lose customers. So, because you didn't really hear about Industry 2.0, really, have you? Or Industry 3.0? It's all this buzzword right now, Industry 4.0. What is this? Why is it such a big thing? Because the boost to productivity means that it's not really an opportunity anymore. It's something that everybody needs to do, wants to do, to stay competitive. And of course, when something needs to happen overnight, because you need it to keep your profits up and running, to keep your company up and running, then that is your main concern. Not what happens if something fails, not what happens in this case when security fails. And that is why there are awareness campaigns everywhere, because a lot of the industries have implemented Industry 4.0 standards, meaning digitalization, automation, smart devices, IoT, how they've come to be called, Industrial Internet of Things, because they needed to keep producing products at a competitive advantage. And it's really hard to talk to these people that usually do industry about security, because this is a historically safe environment. This is an environment that historically has been air-gapped, or simply isolated, or simply not smart enough to be able to be digitally attacked. But here they are with digital devices overnight, because they need to increase production in an environment, world environment, I mean political environment, digital environment, where attacks are so cheap and so easy to do. And that is why we have seen a lot of these breaches, as you've said. And it's always kind of cool when I hold these talks, when I talk about OT, when I hold presentations at various events. One of my slides is always the big important OT attacks in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And it's always nice to see how it started with one attack every 1 or 2 years, big attacks, I mean. big, because small attacks, they happen every time, but big attacks that appear in media. One attack every 1 or 2 years during the 2010s, maybe one attack a year at 2014, then started to grow to 2 attacks a year, and now in 2021, 2021, 2022, 2023, we're at almost 4 big media-worthy attacks each year. It's something that is really happening. It's something that even if most people think it's not happening in their country, it is. It's just not publicized that much because it would be a optical catastrophe for people to know how much critical infrastructure is compromised. Now, obviously, I cannot say these things specifically. I cannot name examples, but I can tell you this much. There are attacks that are going on that do not make the light of day because they have been stopped at the inch before getting into catastrophical shutdown. Critical energy infrastructures that were on the verge of being shut down due to ransomware, due to breaches, due to SCADA compromisation, and just at the last second, they managed to stop them. But they do happen. And they happen because security was not a concern from the get-go. And that is where we stand right now. We have very, very vulnerable systems. And we are just now starting to realize that security is something that needs to happen. So we slap security on top of that.
Wow. Okay. So let's continue a little bit. We'll have how, but first, how to protect industrial assets. But before that, I want to ask you a clarification question. What is the difference between IT security and OT security? How much do they differ one from another? Do they use different protocols? What are do they have different layers? Like, for example, you have in security the 7 layers, the OSI model. Is it different in OT security? What are the, how can I say, what are the main points when somebody needs to know when differentiating between both sides? And yeah, then we'll move to how to do it. But right now, I want to ask you on the topic, what is the difference between both worlds of this security?
That's a great question. And that is something that a lot of people who have worked in IT don't really understand, don't really know. And a lot of people who worked in OT don't really realize the importance of it. So the difference between IT and OT. At the end of the day, if we're talking strictly about the networking side of things, they are honestly borderline the same. We are still using routers, we are still using switches. Most devices right now, most industrial devices are interconnected through regular TCP/IP networks. They used to have dedicated serial connections, but eventually they translated those on digital side of things, on the Ethernet side of things. So you have a lot of protocols that are Modbus over TCP or stuff like that, IEC over TCP, industrial protocols over TCP. The issue stands on how critical these infrastructures are, because when you want to do an upgrade on an IT network because your OSs are old and they're vulnerable, and you saw a big announcement, if you don't upgrade now, you are at risk of being breached, then you do that. You simply schedule a 1-hour maintenance sometime Saturday night, whatever, when nobody is using the network, and you upgrade all the devices that need to be upgraded. The problem is that you can't do that in industrial networks. Sure, if we're talking about some industrial networks, some automation, some manufacturing processes where you could potentially stop manufacturing for an hour to upgrade everything, but that is also a very slim chance. But imagine what would happen if you stopped all devices in a nuclear power plant for an hour to upgrade everything. That is impossible. Or there are power plants that produce steel. Now, to produce steel, you need furnaces that run at such high energy that they cannot be safely stopped. There is so much potential energy in there that if you stopped production and those furnaces cool down, it would take an inordinate amount of energy to start them up again. In fact, so when we talk about industrial networks, there is a huge amount of a huge necessity to never stop production, never stop the infrastructure from running. And that is the primary difference between industrial and between OT and IT. OT is critical. OT means everything that you do has to always function. So you've got lower level traffic because you'll not see high bandwidth in industrial networks. It makes, you're not streaming files, streaming videos. It makes no sense. But you will see situations where even a second of timeout is critical. And besides this, however, and apropos to the following, the next question you're going to ask me and talking about how to protect this. The protocols are different at the application layer. So they do both use TCP and IP. Yeah, correct. But on top of that, there are specific communication protocols that all these industrial networks use, all the industrial devices use. As I said, Modbus, IC, different kind of protocols. These are not just 1, 2, or 3. These are quite a few. And that is why you cannot technically put generic security solutions that are not built for industrial network, because if you put in, let's say, a generic next generation firewall that is used to scan for with IPS and application control, regular HTTP traffic, regular I don't know, messenger traffic, regular Netflix traffic. It will not know how to recognize the industrial protocols. It will not know how to recognize anomalies in the industrial protocols. It will not know how to understand enough to protect industrial network. So that is the second big difference between IT and OT. It does have specific protocols on top of TCP. So even if it does work with the same switches, the same routers, the same networking technology, security-wise, you need something that understands network traffic, and also something that you have complete faith in not breaking down, not failing, not offering false positives, not shutting down your network for even a second.
It's quite astounding what could be the consequences of a similar breach. Yeah, so I know that you went a little bit into how to, but let's elaborate a little bit more. What are the how can I start? Well, you need to educate people. You need to have some processes, and you need to have some technology. So what are those three main domains of cybersecurity have to function, I guess, as well in this field, but in a more different way. You mentioned that the work needs to continue. I mean, you cannot stop. For example, if you want to stop and update the firmware or the operational system of a software development company, you just switch off for 1 hour, and yeah, that you do it. But it's kind of easy to explain this and to, you know, just to run it by the C-level executive. You don't even have to do it. But if you want to do, I don't know, patch management on an OT system, is that even possible to do it? How do you do it? What do you do? How do you protect? I mean, I know that during the conference you'll be more and more specific, but if you could just show a little, open a little bit the door, what are the ways to work, and how do the people, the engineers, the scaling engineers, the automation engineers, and the cybersecurity team need to work? Does it have to be a one single person? You know, those things are quite interesting questions, especially in a place where there are no basically OT security specialists, people who do not understand both worlds. That is what I want to know. If you can speak a little bit more about that.
Right, sure. So yeah, as you said, I couldn't really get into the deep technical stuff because we'd sit here for an hour and I would also need some diagrams. It would be easier for me to show you. But an important Well, an interesting thing that Gartner mentioned, I think this quite last year, was that by 2030, 2025 or 2026, something like that, the majority of industrial security will be done by regular IT security that has been adapted to industrial security. So one important thing here is that because the underlying infrastructure is the same, we're still using TCP/IP, we're still using Ethernet, then the devices that could protect industrial networks, OT, are potentially the same devices that could protect the IT in potentially the same way, but they need that intelligence. So assuming you have the intelligence to understand network industrial protocols, then how would you protect a regular network? Well, you would start at the perimeter, perhaps. You would put a firewall in there that is capable of scanning the ins and outs. But we have a specific nice use case in OT that, as I've said earlier, the bandwidth itself is never too large, where the OT, the industrial networks, is basically comprised of robots talking to each other. They're not streaming Netflix, they're talking to each other. So the information that they send is not big data, but it needs to happen fast. So what we can do is apply high-level processing where in IT you could not, because the traffic would be too high. And here, for example, you could do firewall, so layer 3, layer 4, layer 5, layer 7 security for every little bit, every device there. So you could and should secure and inspect all the traffic that leaves and enters each and every device, because each device that can talk to another device in its vicinity, then that is a vulnerability. And regarding what you said about patching, about firmware, yeah, that is really that is an issue. You very much usually cannot do those firmware upgrades, or they are really hard to do, really hard to create a system where you can take out a device, a PLC, an RTU, a device in an industrial network, and patch it up and plug it back in. So what the security industry has been doing in the past few years is use what we call virtual patching. Virtual patching means that, okay, we are aware that your device is vulnerable. We cannot change that because we cannot upgrade its firmware, but what we could do is we could put a shield in front of your device, metaphorically speaking. We put a firewall. Now, why is it bad to have an older vulnerable firmware? Because that firmware is exploitable, because somebody could look at that firmware, understand it, find a bug in that firmware, and exploit that bug. Any kind of such an exploit means that that attacker communicates to the device, with the device, and sends some commands that might break the device or might give the attacker access to that device. Those commands exist on the communication between the attacker and the device. So if you could see that connection, see that communication, understand it, and recognize any attempt at an exploit, then you can block just that attempt and let all the other traffic flow by. So in that moment, it is the shield in front of the device, the firewall, that recognizes an attempt at an exploit and blocks it. And that exploit never reaches the end device, industrial device. So even if the device is technically, theoretically vulnerable because it has a vulnerable firmware that could be exploited, the exploit cannot reach it. So the exploit will still be prevented. And this is virtual patching. But of course, for this to work, you need to have something that can scan traffic that immediately exits and immediately enters the device. Related to what I said earlier, we need complete full scanning of all the traffic that goes on in the industrial network to and from each device that can communicate on the network, so we can prevent any kind of vulnerability exploit. More than this, of course, there are quite a few devices that help us in industrial networks, just as they help us in the IT network. If we're talking about the devices in our portfolio, we have from endpoint security to deception technology, which is an interesting technology itself, and I will talk about this at more about this at the event. But basically, if you have all of these devices in industrial network, little robots, little programmable logic computers. These are generally devices that don't run a generic operating system. They don't run, usually, they don't run Windows, they don't run Linux. They usually run their own firmwares, their own little softwares. If these devices are somehow breached, if somebody has exploited them, you will know. And that is how it usually happens. These are devices that are attacked, they are breached, they are hijacked. They continue to operate normally until the attacker feels like it is an opportune moment to actually do the attack, to actually attack. And they use these devices to attack the other devices on your network. So what we could do, for example, is create mock devices. You have certain types of PLCs, of programmable logic computers on your network. Let's create a virtual one that doesn't do anything. It's a fake, but it exists in a virtual environment where we scan everything that is happening to that device. And because we scan everything, we hold it in our hands and we see inside it, then we know when it has been breached. And if your fake device has been breached, if honestly, even if somebody just accesses your fake device, then that is definitely an attack, because your fake device is not declared in the network. It is not something that the other devices in your network are configured to use. So any kind of touch on your fake device means an illicit action, an illegitimate action. And in that moment, we understand, oh, okay, somebody hasn't attacked my fake PLC. Obviously, at that point, your other PLCs are in danger, because why would they attack only your fake device and leave your real devices untouched? And various mechanisms, various techniques that we have imported from the IT world, but dedicated to the OT. And in fact, it's honestly why we at Fortinet have quite a strong footprint in the OT technology, because quite a few years ago we realized that we could do this. We realized that IT devices can secure OT as long as the intelligence is there. So most of our devices do have OT intelligence, so we can import the logic of security from the IT to the OT world, of course, taking into account the importance of critical infrastructures, the importance of always up and running processes. But if we're talking about generic security, meaning not just Fortinet, and I'm saying this as an engineer, not necessarily as a Fortinet engineer, there are also products that are dedicated to the industrial networks. These are products that are, let's say, native to the industrial networks. They are security appliances, security solutions that are destined only for the OT network, and their job is to monitor everything and understand, even to a deeper level, all the products there. Maybe understand trends in the processes that are going on in the network. For example, they understand after a week, after 2 weeks, they understand the regular normal range, the range of normal parameters for certain fans, for certain temperature sensors, for certain water purification valves. And if something happens outside of those ranges, if there are anomalies, then these devices are built to understand those anomalies and send warnings to those anomalies. Warning, sorry, to other devices that might take actions into preventing the anomaly.
Yeah, so this means that you're not only actually giving security, but also if there are malfunctions in the devices, if there are something going on wrong in these devices, you can actually see it with those systems, right? Okay, I think that one question that I always ask, and but now I want to a little bit rephrase it, because we are talking about artificial intelligence and about what is going on in the world with the development of ChatGPT and many other tools which are implementing artificial intelligence. Also, the European Commission, the European Union are very active on putting restraints on this, whether people like it or not. I'm sure the technical guys do not like it. On the other side, the public is kind of feels relieved. I don't know if that is the correct term to say it, but anyway, given these trends and everything that is going on, what is your projection about the impact of artificial intelligence on OT security? How do you see this? Do you feel it will have more effect, because it is certainly imported and invested into the automation and the processes into robotics? But what about the security side of it? How do you see this turning out to be?
Fortunately, the first impact of AI, I feel, will be on the negative side, on the attack side, because that is usually the highest acceleration of development of technological adoption, when you can do something to attack something. Because then when you try to attack, when you develop attacking methods, it's not like you need to care about what happened in the past. It's not like you have a network that you need to make sure is still up and running and still viable. You can try anything and see what sticks. On the positive side, on the security side, this is an ongoing development. You will see a lot of security start to implement AI. Now, honestly, a lot of that is marketing, to be fair. And I'm not saying this for other vendors and not specifically for Fortinet. I'm saying, generally speaking, a lot of what AI is in the world right now is if this, then that. That's not real AI. That's not real machine learning. But we at Fortinet, at least generally in the AI, when we see AI, when you see machine learning in our devices, and this usually is on the IPS or antivirus engine or various kinds of analysis, then those are trained neural networks. And that is a continuous development. So that is an attempt to stay on top of the attacks. On the OT side of things, I think the AI will be quite a revolution, but it will take a little bit of time. It will be a little slower, because we're talking again about critical infrastructures. So the general feeling is that AI is something a bit untrustworthy at this point. And honestly, it's a fair assumption, because with AI, you have a black box. You don't really understand what's going on inside. You know what goes out, you know what goes in, and you're expecting what goes out to statistically be a good result. But that is the whole point of AI, statistically a good result. Not always, you cannot guarantee that it will always be a good result. And that's great in IT, when you work statistically, when you say, okay, I will do $9 million this year due to AI, and I will lose 4 million because they will do bad results, but it's still a net plus of 5 million. But in OT networks, where, as I said, everything is critical, even a shutdown of 1 minute is bad, or an AI that gives an anomaly when in fact it's a normal operation of a nuclear power plant, and that might shut down the power plant, that is bad. We cannot afford that. So AI in OT, I think, will do little steps. Start with the things that are not directly impactful. Maybe not implement AI during the actual processing, during the actual production, manufacturing, whatever. Maybe do AI on top of that. Analysis of how it works, analysis of efficiency, optimization suggestions, something that takes the information from the industry, from the industrial network, and gives you an estimation of what you could do better. But of course, that would not stop the security side of things. As I said, that is completely separate. And that is unfortunately something that I'm expecting to blow up in the near future.
Thank you, Andrei, for your perspective. I think that with this sort of a short revealing, we'll have a much interesting discussion during this week's conference. If you have any last words you want to share with the people who listen to the podcast, and any final words on your thoughts on OT security, on the development, especially in countries where it is not such a hot topic, unlike, for example, US and Middle East and other parts where it is a trending solution. But I think that sooner or later it will also come here as a critical part of securing our country's infrastructure.
It will. I mean, that's all I can say. It will become a big thing. It will be an important aspect. It was The same in Romania a few years ago. We started doing exactly what you're doing right now, raise awareness, talking about this stuff. And it's not like suddenly there were more, well, suddenly there were more attacks because 2021, 2022, as I said, but not just that. We realized that the attacks, the breaches, the threats, they were in the past as well. Just people were not really paying attention. People were just going along with it. Manufacturing being impaired, issues in the critical infrastructures that, okay, just produce some downtime from time to time, and nobody knew exactly what is going on there. But as I said, the past few years have seen an increase in technological adoption in industrial networks, especially in manufacturing and in energy. Honestly, people are kind of a little bit ignorant on how critical the evolution of energy infrastructure is, and they don't most people don't really connect the dots of what's going on right now. We have a huge, massive increase in the push to adopt electrical consumption. For example, in America, they have banned the usage of gas stoves for home use. You are no longer allowed, well, you are allowed to use them if you have them, but you're no longer allowed to buy gas stoves. You need to buy electrical stoves. More than this, most people are starting to use air conditioners. Most people are starting to use air fryers. Most people are starting to use electrical fires, right? And these things, these seem like little things, right? What to 2,000 more watts to be used for 3 hours. It seems little, but it adds up massively. And then a huge increase happened in the past years, past 2 or 3 years, when electrical cars have become more accessible. And again, something that is really that a lot of people are missing. The amount of pressure on the energy grid that electrical cars have is huge, absolutely huge, and there is no way right now to get the benefit of that. For example, there are some attempts to use the electrical cars that's plugged in at night as batteries that you can use as a city to store energy, but that's not used right now. So all of these consumers are putting a massive drain on the electrical infrastructure, on the energy infrastructure. And if that's not enough, then all of these are dynamic consumers. It's not a trend, and that's really, really bad for an energy infrastructure, which is designed and architected in such a way that you know from this hour to this hour you consume this much. So then we switch to other circuits. So in this hour you use that much, a lot more. So we account for that. But when you have electrical vehicles that could charge any time of the day, dryers, air fryers, big consumer devices that are using randomly, dynamically the energy of an infrastructure that was not designed for that, then the only way to account for that is to not use humans, is to use smart grids, which are transformers that have smart functions to dynamically distribute and create the circuits needed to, well, distribute the energy in such a way that it will not fry the network. So as this is, again, not an opportunity, this is a necessity that will become very much aware in the following years. And when you have smart transformers everywhere in your city and you don't think about how to secure them, then anyone can start attacking them. So like it or not, these are concerns that will become evident in the moment that all this industry is naturally evolving to be digitized. If we don't talk about them now, we will talk about them 2 years from now for sure. But if we talk about it 2 years from now, we might not be as prepared, which is why it's so important to have these discussions, to have these talks, to have these events, because the moment will come when these will be critical. Well, technically speaking, it's already critical. And the sooner we understand and are aware of what we need, that we need it, the sooner we can prepare ourselves.
Well, with that nice words, I would like to finish our episode. Thank you very much, Andrei, for your time. I think it was insightful, and we are really looking forward to the conference, but not only to the conference, rather to initiating this discussion and seeing step by step people realizing the critical importance of securing your industry, securing your systems, your energy, and why this is such an important topic, especially in this digitalized society and technology that we live in. With that, thank you very much to everyone who listened to this episode and who has stayed until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Also, if you want to follow us, what we do, we are very active on LinkedIn. We are active also in our website, where we publish different videos, different articles. Also on our channel, we are regularly having webinars, podcast episodes, and different topics also always come up.